Recently, another area which we see coming up is how can AI help us with our outreach activities? Because I mean, generating content is such an important part of today's marketing in general, but not just, let's say, commercial marketing, also scientific outreach depends on content that needs to be generated. And AI can definitely help a lot in structuring that content generation, and also the localization of content.
Welcome to the podcast, everyone. We're really excited to be here again to talk about AI. Today, we're going to address the topic of implementation of strategy, of how to measure ROI on your projects. And if we're lucky, we'll also address a little bit about how we scale our projects within AI. And one of my favorite guests is with us again, Behsad from Pharmax. As you know, he has a ton of experience in the industry. I would say he's an AI pioneer within the pharma industry. They've developed their own AI agent, I guess we would call it, right, Behsad?
Yeah, I
And so
think you
we're
can, right? Yeah.
really excited to have you again with us.
Thank you.
And
Thanks for having me.
great. So let's kick it off. Today, we're going to start with the topic of AI implementation of strategy. And when we look at the companies, a lot of those have sometimes doubts and questions with how can we really get started in a good way. So what would be your recommendations in terms of getting started with a good strategy and getting rolling with this important topic?
That's a great question, Lina. I think you already said one key point that I believe needs to be part of these first steps when a company decides to engage with AI, right? Which is about strategy. So I have a feeling that a lot of organizations um, either put not enough or too much effort into the first step of strategy around AI, right? The development of that. But obviously, a key step is to understand how AI could help you with your business targets, right? So whatever goals you have set yourself as an organization, AI should fit into those, right? I mean, if you can't find a match between what AI can do and your business targets, I think that that should be a question mark then for you, right? But obviously, there are a couple of things that I guess any organization should look into. One is to define what pilots would make most sense. So after you've set out a bit of your strategy and maybe like a tiny roadmap of what AI could bring, you should maybe start looking into where would AI bring the most, right? Not just to show immediate value, but also to convince the organization, right, of the value of AI. So targeted pilots, I think, are important to look after or to decide on. And with that, you should bring in the different departments that could meaningfully cooperate on a pilot. Many organizations might think having kind of a very siloed pilot is useful. I'm not sure about that because, I mean, if it's in a small silo of the organization, it might not get out of it, right? And people might dismiss it. So maybe you want to consider pilots that do encourage a bit of cross-functional collaboration for the AI implementation. I think that is another piece, right? And lastly, an important point is always the data. AI needs information, AI needs data. So look where in your organization good pockets of data exist, and where also maybe these information kind of also pose a challenge, whether it's about retrieving them, accessing them, or simply understanding them. Those should be aspects you should look into. I guess those are good starting points for understanding where to go.
Great. Now you said something about, matching it with your business goals. Do you see any typical kind of areas where, across your experience from working with clients and different companies, that, it's a good place to start? for a company?
So yeah, I mean, obviously, one topic that recurrently comes to the table is we have a large repository of data, and we don't make much use out of it. So that's what we keep hearing, which is not even function specific. So this kind of, we see this with commercial teams, we see this with teams within medical affairs or with market access. So I think this is something that's obviously a pain point, right? With more and more data and information being generated, and in our industry, we just have more and more access also to information. I see that coming a lot as a request. So we have this SharePoint where we have like gazillions of documents and information. Can AI help us to leverage this more? So that's definitely an area which we see a lot. And recently, another area which we see coming up is how can AI help us with our outreach activities? Because I mean, generating content is such an important part of today's marketing in general, but not just, let's say, commercial marketing, also scientific outreach depends on content that needs to be generated. And AI can definitely help a lot in structuring that content generation, and also the localization of content. So that's another area.
That is a very interesting point. And me coming from a marketing background with many years in that field, I definitely know that one of the things that always is a struggle for most people is also the speed to create content and the continuity of creating content, right? So especially in these days, I think where people are consuming faster and smaller bit sizes of information, that is definitely a challenge for most teams, right? So that's a really good point.
Absolutely.
You talked a little bit about the cross-functional pilots, right? So I thought that was quite interesting. Could you again talk a little bit to some of the examples maybe you have where you've seen that really work well? You know, typically good matches in terms of cross-functional teams, like could be medical with marketing, or what is your experience in that area, so that people have some ideas like, okay, who could I think about involving in my AI projects?
So I would say one good example is we just talked about that, right? Content creation or content adjustment, modularization. So we have, for example, seen projects where a commercial team wants to simplify their work, right, around content creation, and they started basically leveraging AI in various forms. And at the same time, then they also were pulling in the colleagues from medical affairs to see if the approach also could be useful for them. So in this initial pilot setup, the commercial team decided that this is something that medical affairs could also benefit from. So they addressed this also with them, and they then came back to the table saying, yes, we also have to communicate with stakeholders, right? In the way we're making our outreaches and the way we communicate. So the medical affairs team basically then jumped on that and said, yes, this is a pilot we can also basically be in together, obviously with the usual kind of separations, because commercial does one thing and then medical affairs does something else. But both of them were leveraging the same infrastructure, the same pilot that was basically built for them, and they were able to share experiences and also kind of give kind of input and feedback to each other about what did work, what didn't work. So I guess that was a good example of how within an organization, even cross-functionally, an AI pilot could make sense.
Interesting. That leads me to think about something else, which I've seen a lot in as a challenge, right, for many teams when we talk especially about content, is the sort of corporate local adaptation of content. Have you seen teams or companies use that as a pilot for AI, where the corporate teams typically create sort of certain standards, and then the local teams in different countries need to adapt that content. Would that be a good candidate for an AI pilot?
So that's an interesting question because we have not seen that basically you start from the global side and then immediately involve also the local organizations. I would think that for a pilot, running that maybe initially at the global level, just for understanding how a technology would work, what are the kind of do's and don'ts of these new technologies, and really testing it and making sure it works well might be a better way to introduce AI versus immediately involving, let's say, local organizations, because it could be that maybe the technology is still not delivering to its full capacity. There could still be some flaws maybe in the way it works, and involving local organizations who are always pressured for time and they have capacity and other crunches, right? Might be a bit more of a challenge, right? So I guess maybe here a bit more of a staggered way. Start with global or a regional organization, test it thoroughly there. And when it works, then basically start involving the local organizations might be more useful.
Interesting. Well, that's definitely a pilot waiting to be tested, right? Because I think it's interesting, some of those possibilities that we have now, especially with translation and adaptation, right? So to local laws and regulations. So thank you so much. Great. So with that, guys, thank you for tuning in, listening to our podcast. Keep subscribing either on YouTube or on LinkedIn. And my name is Line Østergaard. It's been a pleasure to be here with you today. And until next time.